Hi there, I'm J. Scott Campbell, the artist who brought you 4 or 5 sexy comic covers that skyrocketed in value because of y'all overly thirsty fanboys. And hey, thank you so much. But I just wanted to let you know that just because there's a sexy cover on the book does not mean the rest of the issue is gonna be that sexy. So I'll tell you what, I'll stick to my schedule of putting out a new cover every 3 to 4 years whenever I need money, and eventually someone's gonna come along and program an AI to create an OnlyFans that uses my artwork as reference material. It's only a matter of time. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and today we're looking at issue 1 of Magic by Ashley Allen and Germán Peralta. I was very tempted to get the J. Scott Campbell cover because I know that those do skyrocket in value, but honestly, I think this one is better. So I've seen a lot of decidedly positive reviews for this issue, and I disagree. And I think the main difference between their opinions and my opinion of the issue is that their opinions tend to be based on what happens in the issue and what's going on with the character, whereas my opinion tends to be based on how good of a job the creators did. Because even though as comic fans we love stories, so we show up for these stories, what's more important than the story itself is how the story is told. Like I've said before, some of the best stories, the most compelling, most emotionally captivating stories that I have read have just involved 2 people sitting in the same room arguing with each other. Whereas there are tons of stories out there that involve all of these very unique ideas and characters and plots, but they're just not good because they're not told very well. So when it comes to this issue, even though the characters are cool, even though I like the characters, even though the story itself is interesting and somewhat unique, it just doesn't do it for me. It doesn't really get me. But there is a very good chance that a lot of people reading this issue are relatively new to the X-Men, they're relatively new to this character, and they're just trying to dip their toes in. And if that's you, welcome. We're glad to have you. We hope you enjoy your experience with comic books. And when you're new to comic books, very commonly the story and the characters are what's going to stick out to you the most. And the first stories you read as a comic fan are probably going to be the ones that define your idea of that character in that era. And then for most fans, the longer they're into this hobby, the more they start focusing on the creators instead of what's happening in the issues, and they will follow creators more closely than their favorite characters. For example, Wolverine, Spider-Man, and Captain America are 3 of my absolute favorite characters, but I'm not collecting any of those series right now because I don't think the artists are doing them justice. But my point is, Marvel is pulling in a ton of new readers lately over the past decade or so, especially the last 5 years. So they're really focusing on just getting people acquainted with these characters. So speaking as somebody who has read all of X-Men and all of New Mutants, I have very high expectations for this character because she is super cool and I've seen her written in a really cool way, and this just doesn't quite meet those expectations. But for somebody who's relatively newer to comic books and hasn't read all of the source material from the 80s and the 90s, this is probably pretty good. So if you don't know the general story of this issue, here it is. We start with this character running down the street. She's running away from something, looking for help, but she gets captured and pulled off into the shadows, the woods, I don't know, somewhere scary. We transfer to Illyana Rasputin's dream of what life could have been like if she hadn't been kidnapped by the demon Belasco and raised in the very hell-adjacent realm of Limbo and slowly turned into this evil version of herself, the Dark Child. She monologues about how she's got this constant devil on her shoulder thing with the Dark Child who's always trying to escape, and she has to keep it under control, and she's very morose about it. So of course the X-Men surprise her because it's her birthday, which is a very X-Men flavored scene, even though I don't really like this team of X-Men and I'm not reading that book. She basically says, leave me alone, I gotta go save some mutants and y'all are being lazy, and the X-Men say, you know what, yeah, we're gonna continue to be lazy because I'm still in my pajamas and I can't save people right now. Illyana shows up to a funeral for a mutant and there's an angry mob outside who's very anti-mutant, which feels a little bit old-fashioned. I wish that persecution would kind of grow up in the comics narrative because I don't feel like this accurately represents how people would persecute each other now. This represents how people were persecuting each other in the 60s when the X-Men were created. Bullying looks different now than it did then. Classism looks different now than it did then. And even though I'm glad we have this familiar take on persecution, so it feels comfortable, I do wish that it felt more relevant to the times. So anyway, Illyana shows up to the funeral and everybody's complaining about her, and then these demons show up and she says, oh boy, I get to fight some demons on my birthday, best day ever. One of the demons grabs another mutant and tries to teleport away with her, but Magic tackles the demon through the portal so that she also gets teleported, and they find themselves in this graveyard where she finds this creepy kid who turns himself into a really tall crow-themed bad guy with a revolver. He's trying to get mutant sacrifices so that he can break this seal, which is one of 5, and these 5 seals are holding back the entity known as Liminal, which we know nothing about yet. He also uses magic with his revolver where he can tell the bullets what to do and they do these special things, which is kind of cool and kind of a gimmick. I don't know, it's not that bad. This other kid shows up with his grandma, who's supposed to be the keeper keeper of this seal, and she tries everything she can to stop the breaking of the seal, but she eventually fails. During the fight with the crow guy, Ilyana is constantly pressured by the Dark Child to just let the Dark Child take over and become this unthinking, unstoppable brute. Thankfully, the old lady who knows a thing or two about magic reminds her that she can just use magic instead of using brute force, so she does finally use a spell, which is not something we get to see very often from Ilyana in the comics lately, which is refreshing, but it doesn't really work for long, and ultimately the seal is broken, the crow guy succeeds, and Ilyana manages to put up some kind of temporary barrier around the seal, and I'm not really sure what effect that is having, whether or not it's doing something. The old lady dies and leaves her magic book and responsibilities with the kid. The kid decides he needs to stick close to Ilyana, so they go through a portal together, and as they leave, this page falls out of the journal that shows the Dark Child unleashed, which is a very dark prophecy. And that page is really cool. That's probably my favorite page of art in the whole issue. So we've got Ilyana struggling with her dark side. We've got her fighting this new villain who she probably could have beaten if she'd called in the X-Men like a responsible character. We've got some new entity that's trying to take over the world or something, we don't know. And we've got this kid who's on a mission to stop that entity and or stop Dark Child. He isn't sure yet. He just wants to be close to it so he can figure it out as it goes. Now, all the elements of a really cool, really compelling story are there. In fact, it kind of reminds me of Something is Killing the Children already, which is a great series, but for some reason, it's really not leaving that strong of an impression on me. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just not leaving a strong impression on me either way. It's just kind of meh. I've been seeing a lot of praise for the art style, but honestly, it seems to me like Marvel House style art. It's not detailed, it's not all that moody, it's just kind of, this is what's happening in this panel. It's not a lot of energy, it's not a lot of mood. And I found the writing to be pretty exposition heavy, which is fair because it's a first issue and we're probably introducing a lot of new people to this character, so there's backstory to go through. But like I've said before, showing is so much more compelling than telling, and I wish this issue did a little bit more showing and a little bit less telling. The coloring, on the other hand, I think is pretty well done. The penciling work I don't think is giving the colorist all that much to work with, but they're doing a great job with what they have, and they're contributing as much as they possibly can to the mood. I'm not going to do that much more nitpicking about the issue because honestly I just don't have strong opinions about it. But if this is one of your first times interacting with this character or one of your first times looking at X-Men comics, yeah, this is probably pretty good. If you're here for the character because you heard they were cool and you wanted to find out what that was all about, you'll probably like it. But just know that when you're done with this stuff is even better. This issue in particular actually doesn't have a lot of Ilyana in it, but it is one of my favorite issues of New Mutants. So overall, I'm not that engaged in the storyline. It's semi-interesting and it might just take some time to warm up, but it definitely didn't blow me away, which is what the internet led me to believe it would do. I'll give it a score of like 6 out of 10. It's like average-ish. It's worth reading, but it's not going to blow your mind probably. If you haven't seen my videos on every comic shop in Georgia, then what are you doing? They're amazing and I put a ton of work into them and I promise you will not be disappointed, so go and watch those. I'm finally getting back into the swing of doing regular reviews. It's been months of working on those videos, so now I can finally focus on something else. Usually at this point in the video, I would give you some announcements on what's coming up in the channel, but right now there's a lot of balls in the air, and I just don't know what's gonna happen next. So thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm Kurt Williams, and you are somebody else.